Everyone, welcome to my talk on building components in Sitecore 10 using the ASP.NET Rendering SDK. So for those that don't know me, I'm Adam Seabridge. I'm a freelance developer and consultant based in the UK, and I've worked with Sitecore for about 8 years now. And I've been a Sitecore MVP for the last 3 years. So today we're going to talk about the .NET Core Rendering SDK and what it does. And then I'm going to provide a quick overview of the Getting Started template. And then I'm going to jump into a live demo of building a component in Sitecore 10. And then I've got a few tips, hopefully, to share. And there should be hopefully some time for questions at the end as well. So JSS introduced the layout service. I think it was back in Sitecore 9, and that separated the layout and the renderings to provide Sitecore content as JSON. So this allowed rendering of Sitecore pages outside of the site, outside Sitecore in a JSS app using the SDKs for front-end frameworks. So for React, Vue, Angular, etc. And the new ASP.NET Rendering SDK in Sitecore 10 is a new SDK that sits alongside the JSS SDK, and it uses the same services to render content in a rendering host using .NET Core. So essentially, headless is no longer just JavaScript from Sitecore 10 onwards. So the new ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK provides a number of features, such as the client API to call the layout service, placeholder rendering and field helpers to render fields, mapping of HTTP requests to layout service requests, and then binding of the response to strongly typed models, and then also experience editor and analytics support. I'm going to try and explain the HTTP request pipeline quickly to give you an idea of how things work. This diagram was kind of provided by Nick Rasselman from Sitecore. So thanks again to Nick for sharing this with me. And it provides an overview of the request pipeline for the ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK. So the user's HTTP request resolves a controller and action, and then the rendering engine middleware runs before the controller actions are invoked, and that makes a request to the layout service to return the response. The response is then returned to the rendering host HTTP context, and the controller action is invoked, which then renders the view. And then the root placeholders are rendered with tag helpers, and then models are bound to the views, and tag helpers are used in the view to render out the fields from the model. And then the final response is returned back to the user. So it's a little bit complicated, but hopefully it'll start to make a bit more sense in the demo later when you see how the various elements work together. So I put this in as a new slide since last time I presented this at the the UK Sitecore user group, because I know Bala was interested in perhaps why you might use it or when you should use it. So there's kind of three core reasons, I guess. So for new Sitecore 10 builds where you are not using SXA or you don't need SXA features and workflow, and when you've got complex business logic on the front end, or project where you might have used JSS, but actually you don't need the rich front end experience that you get with a JSS app, or lastly, where you have existing .NET Core applications and you want to add Sitecore content in alongside those. So I'm going to be using a slightly customized version of the Getting Started template for this demo. The Getting Started template is a sample environment provided by Sitecore to try out Sitecore headless development with ASP.NET and Sitecore containers. And you don't need to use Docker to use the ASP.NET Rendering SDK. However, using the Getting Started template will save you quite a lot of time if you want to experiment with it. There's a lot less you'll need to set up versus if you install Sitecore 10 separately and then wanted to test this out. So the Getting Started template contains a Docker environment for Sitecore XP single topology with an ASP.NET rendering host. It has a number of serialized items for a one-page sample site, and then a Visual Studio solution, which includes 2 projects. You've got a platform project for the content management instance, and then a rendering host project as well. It's worth noting it doesn't follow the Helix principles as it's designed to keep things simple, but Helix examples are available from the link above on this slide, doc.sitecore.com. So there are some prerequisites here that are worth covering off. So those are .NET Core 3.1 SDK, .NET Framework 4.8, Visual Studio 2019, and then you need Docker for Windows with Windows containers enabled, and PowerShell 5.1. So you might already have some of those things installed on your machine anyway, such as, I guess, PowerShell, maybe Docker if you've already been working with containerization, and maybe some of the .NET Core SDK stuff as well. So there's a video down the bottom of this slide here which really goes into the detail of the setup. That's from fellow MVP Robert Hock, and that's really useful. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but the key steps are to download and install the templates. That's step 1 here on the slide. .NET New, and then pass in the template name and the source. Then you need to stop IIS before you do anything else, because you can't run IIS at the same time as the Getting Started template, as it uses some of the same ports that IIS uses. Then you need to run .NET New on the Getting Started template and pass in the project name that you want to create. So I've just used my project, which is the default here in my demo. And then lastly, you need to follow the steps to set up the container environment using the init and op PowerShell files that come as part of the Getting Started template. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the demo. So this is a live demo. I'm hoping Docker behaves. Okay, so the first thing to probably show you is the actual project within well, the actual Getting Started template content. So when you pull it down, you'll see you get a Docker folder with some Docker images, and you get a Visual Studio solution, and you get your Docker Compose files, and then some PowerShell files, which are used for the setup of this. So I've actually completed all the steps that I talked through that are detailed here, and as I say in the video that I linked, and I've got to the bottom here where I've got my containers all up and running and everything's working correctly. So you can see my content management instance is running here on cm.myproject.localhost. And then we also have the rendering host instance, which is running on myproject.localhost. So this isn't quite what the Getting Started template looks like. This is a customized version, as I said. I've added Bootstrap 4 in here, and I've built a few components, built a hero component and these content components here, and added a bit of CSS and stuff just to make it a bit more interesting. By default, this is kind of the white screen with the kind of Sitecore hero banner that you get out of the box. So today we're going to demo building a new component. We're going to build a card component. So if you've used Bootstrap before, you'll hopefully be familiar with this kind of card component or other components like this that you might have seen. That's what we're going to try and build in the demo today. And we're going to put that hopefully between the hero here and these content components. Okay. Just need to close my slides 1 second. Okay, so if we look at what I did to get this up and running, so I've run the command that I told you before. So I did is reset stop to stop is, and then I started up Docker. So you can see my Docker for desktop is running here, and then I did a Docker compose up to bring up my containers. So you can see these are all running, they're all green, and I did that just through the command window, and you get a lot of output, so it's kind of gone off screen, but this basically, if it's all kind of white and I've not got any errors, and it's also showing that all my containers are up and running in Docker Desktop, then things are looking good. And that's when you should then be able to see that your content management instance is up and running. It'll ask you to log in with Sitecore Identity before you can access the CM, and then your rendering host instance should show up as well. So if we jump into the Visual Studio project, then that comes as part of the Getting Started template. So this is where, as I say, we have two different projects. We've got our platform project, and there's some custom configuration in here that comes with Getting Started template to configure a few different things with the CM. And then this is our rendering host project. So in here we've got kind of this a similar structure to what you'd expect in any kind of normal .NET Core app. We've got our models folder, we've got our view folder, we've got some CSS and images in here, and then one of the key things is this startup file. So this is the entry point for the application, just like in standard .NET Core, and this handles all our bindings for the rendering engine, setting up our different settings and variables, and our routing. So this is really important. I'm going to come back to this in a bit. And also something else to note is that inside the views folder, it follows a convention where our views need to live within this Sitecore component folder for the rendering SDK to pick them up correctly. So we'll be creating our view here. We also already have a layout. So this comes out of the box with the Getting Started template. I've just customized it a little bit. So I've added some different placeholders and things in here. And we're going to use this My Project Container placeholder to add our new card component. So you can see this is using the SC placeholder tag helper to render this out and passing the name in. So this is kind of new in the rendering host SDK. So you'll see we're going to use some more tag helpers later when we create our component as well. And then last thing to note in here is that it uses .NET Watch. So all the changes in the rendering project are automatically deployed to the rendering host, because .NET Watch runs on save. And then in the CM here, you can actually publish in the CM project, the platform project, you can publish your config if you make any changes in there as well. So it's quite cool because you can almost immediately refresh your page here to see your changes that you make in Visual Studio. Okay, so we're going to get started with actually building a component. So we're going to build what's called a model bound view. And the first step of that is to actually go into the content management instance. And because the Getting Started template pushes some serialized items into Sitecore using the Sitecore CLI, the new Sitecore CLI, it creates as a home item and some templates and folders. You can see there's some custom components I've created here below the home item. And there's also some layout and renderings that come with this as well, which I'll show you a bit more on later. So the first step here is to actually create our template. So if we go into templates, we'll see there's already a My Project folder under project. So this is kind of as helix as the Getting Started template gets, I guess. And then we're going to insert ourselves a new card template. I'm going to create it in that folder. And then it doesn't really matter what the section's called. I'm just going to call it card data. And then we're going to add 4 fields. So we're going to try and match the fields that we have here, basically. So we're going to have an image, a title, some text, and a link. So that's just going to be a single line text field. Then we have text, and this is going to be rich text. We're going to have an image. And then we're going to have a link. So we're going to set ourselves an icon as well. If you've not seen this little tool before, it's pretty cool. Sitecore icon search. It's like a browser plugin, and it'll set you an icon. Lets you search for the Sitecore icons. Quite useful. So I've added that. So that follows kind of standard MVC, and then when our next step is then to build add a rendering, and this is where things start to get a little bit different. So if we go into the layout folder, go into renderings, projects, again it follows the same structure. This is already there for you. We're just going to create a new component here, and we need to use this new rendering type of JSON rendering in order for the Rendering SDK to send this back. So again, we're just going to call this card. So it needs to, for convention, follow the same name as your as the view and the model we're going to create. And then we want to set ourselves our data source location. So just going to set that to the root, and then we're going to pick our card template that we just created. Save that. And then again, we can set ourselves an icon. Sometimes it doesn't do it the first time. Again, okay. So we've now got our rendering. So then the next step is we need to go into our placeholder settings, and like you would in normal Sitecore MVC, we need to make, this is the placeholder that I showed you before. So we've got the My Project container placeholder, and it doesn't have any components in it at the moment. So just like in standard Sitecore MVC, we need to add our component and make it available. So we add our card to it. And then up here, our home item is using a layout which is called main layout. That comes with the getting started template by default. There's a field on here that I believe is used by JSS. I've not done much with JSS, but is also used by the, because it's for the layout service, effectively. This is where we register our placeholders. And if we don't add our placeholder to here, the layout service doesn't know about our placeholder, and therefore it won't return any components that are added to that placeholder to the rendering host. So if we then save that, that then tells the layout service to return our data, to return in the response our container placeholder and any components that we add within it. Okay, so the next step is we can add this component to a page. So if we go into our home item, we can open it up in Experience Editor, and you can see it's rendering out my components for like my hero and my text components in Experience Editor. Even though this is using the rendering host SDK, it's running them out perfectly fine. So it's got full Experience Editor support. I believe Horizon support is not there yet, but is on the way. And you can see this is our new container that is being displayed here that we've just added. So at this point, we can add our component to the page, and we can create some new content for it, but the rendering host doesn't actually know about our component. So when we add it to the page, you'll see that it says unknown component card. If I highlight that, you can read it. So that's fine, that's expected. We haven't done anything in Visual Studio yet, so that's the next step. So I'll jump over to Visual Studio, close that down. So the first step in Visual Studio is to set ourselves up a model for our card. So we need to add a class, and we're just going to call it model. Okay, and if you're used to using Glass Mapper or is it Synthesit or Fortis? There's various different kind of mappers that some people use, or they might have rolled their own. This is where things might get a little bit different. So we are going to be using a new type that is part of the layout service. So you'll see here we've got this new Sitecore layout service client response model field. So these are new field types, and these are what we need to use in order for this to work. So we need to give, so we'll start with the title field. So that one is just a single line text field. So we're going to use the text field type. And then we've got a new one, which is rich text field for our text. And then for our link, we will use the hyperlink field. And then lastly, we also have an image, and that uses image field. So make sure you're using the right types here, else you'll find that the layout service won't recognize it, won't return it, and that can all get a bit confusing. So these are all documented under tag helpers on the doc.sitecore.com under the new Sitecore 10 documentation. So you can see the different types that are supported here. Read through all that. That's really useful to understand how these all work and so on. Okay, so we've got our model now, and we've.
All right, that's a bunch of them. Nothing. I'll take it. I'll take more.
Too much.
Yeah.
We've populated it with all our properties. So the next step is to create a view. So as I said before, we need to create our view here in the Sitecore component folder. So we'll just create a view like we normally would. And we're going to call it.
Hello.
We're going to call it card. And we're just using an empty view here. And then, as I said, we are trying to create the card, same kind of card structure that Bootstrap has. So I'm going to paste some HTML in for Bootstrap. So this is the standard kind of HTML, and then we're going to convert this now into an actual proper component and map our fields. So first thing we need to do is add our model. And then we've got various tag helpers here to help us render these fields out. And you can see for the image, there's for links and images and other more complicated fields, there's kind of two different ways of doing them. You can use this SC image, or you can still use just a standard image tag. So you can kind of experiment with whichever approach you want to take for this. I'm going to use the SC image approach. And then what we need to do is we need to bind our model property to it. So it's a bit slightly different syntax for this to some of the other fields. Using uppercase at uppercase model and then image. And then you can mark them as editable for Experience Editor. I think this particular field is actually editable by default anyway, but we'll set that, and we need our closing tag on there. And then for the title, we can just use the H2 as is. So we can just bind it, and we can just, you can see here, we can just use the property rather than having to do the at model.image. And then the same for the text field. This one's in a div because it renders out HTML, so it could render out a p tag, for example. So we need to make sure that's in a div. So that one's text. And then this link, again, there's different options here for links, but I'm going to use the SC link option. Again, I'm going to mark that as editable. And I need to bind it to my link. Okay, so we've now got our model, our view where we've referenced our model, we've bound our image, we've bound our title, our text, and our link. So all being well, we've now created our model and our view, and those should be okay. And then the final step is to wire these up now and tell the rendering SDK engine, the Sitecore rendering engine, about our model and our view. So we need to use this syntax here. You'll see there's already a model bound view. There's a couple of model bound views in here that I've created for my hero and so on. So we just put in here our card model and then the name of our view, which is card. And that now tells the rendering engine about our model and our view. So that will then wire everything up for us. So I'm just going to build that. Technically, because it's using the .NET Watch, you may well not have to. You might be able to just save it. But just on the safe side, I'm going to build it. And then we can go over to Sitecore and we can refresh. And we can see it's pulled our card component, but we didn't add any content to it. So that's what we need to do now. But we can see that now it understands about our card component. The rendering host and the rendering engine is aware of it. You see you've got rich text support here. So if we wanted to, we can bold things or whatever we want to do. And we can also add a link field. So for now, I'll put in putting a link to Google. And then lastly, we can add an image. So I'm going to pick this narrow one because this card is quite a narrow kind of design. And then we should just be able to save that. So at this point, because we're in Experience Editor over on our publish page, we still don't get anything because it doesn't know about it yet. The layout service hasn't been updated. So now we should be able to go over here and we can publish our site. We should just be able to do a smart publish. And then all being well, it should update everything, publish our template, publish our placeholder changes, our rendering, etc. And then we'll refresh it. There we go. So there's our component being rendered out using the .NET Core SDK. One thing to note is if you're having issues, just show you quickly, there are some things you can do. So there's a really useful command, which is this one, docker compose logs f rendering, and what that does, if I run that, is that will actually show you the response from, well, it shows you a lot of debugging info, but at the end here you get the response from the layout service, and you can see this is my page, so somewhere up here is the title of my page. Yeah, so you can see this is my home page, and then these are all my placeholders, and at the bottom here is my my project containing placeholder, and you can see that it's got my card component in it. So if you're having problems with fields not displaying, components not rendering out, then check the layout service response here, and check for errors in the console and things as well. So maybe you've not added your component to the that layout service placeholder setting that I showed you earlier. That might be why it's not coming back. Maybe there's an error in your code. You can, if you're not careful, you make a typo or something in your model or your view, you can potentially break the rendering host. So just check the logs. That's the best thing to do if you're having issues. All right, I'm going to jump back into the slides. Got a couple more slides, and then hopefully we can have any questions if anyone's got any. So just a few tips. As I said before, check the Docker console for any issues there. That's really useful to understand if there's any errors or anything that's not shown correctly in the layout service that you expect. If you have any issues with the rendering host or content manage not updating, then this command is really useful. This docker compose restart rendering CM. I actually had to run that just before this demo because my rendering host was playing up. You're best off running that command with rendering host and content management instance, because when the CM restarts, if you're using Experience Editor, Docker assigns the rendering host a new IP, and that can cause you some issues. So you're best off just restarting them all both at the same time. Read upon that tag helper documentation that I showed you. That's really useful to understand about your models and how they're then rendered out in your views and what's available. Take a look at that Helix example that's there. That'll give you a better idea of how to do this, but following Helix principles. And then lastly, make sure you've got either version 14.1 or 15.1 of the Sitecore ASP.NET DLLs in the rendering host project, and also the Sitecore layout service client DLLs, because in the 14.0 and 15.0 versions there were some issues. Experience Editor didn't work very well or at all in version 14.0, I think. So if you're having issues with that, make sure you've updated them. So you just need to do that in the NuGet package references of the project. That's everything, I think. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Twitter, or I'm around the Sitecore Slack a lot of the time, or if you wanted to go old school, feel free to drop me an email. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them and try and answer them, hopefully.
I believe there were a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, great.
Yeah, one is not related to this, but can anybody point to the Sitecore official announcement on Azure PaaS support going to be stopped?
There's some official documentation somewhere, if I can dig it out, for the announcement around PaaS and when they. I'm not sure it details exactly when they're planning on phasing it out, but I think they state in 10.1 that they are planning on marking it as obsolete or degraded, etc. So there is an announcement somewhere. I'm not sure I can put my hands on it right now though.
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't aware of that, but I did get a confirmation in one of the Sitecore lunches,
Right.
where there were people from Sitecore, they themselves said it should be fine if we are building with 9.3 at the moment, like we could use it. But their recommendation was to go with non-pass solution if you are okay to build something new. Just don't do pass.
Yeah, I guess you'll need to go to 10 to get the container support though first, I suppose.
Yeah. Anton, I'm not sure if that helped, but we really did not have a link that we could help you out.
I'll see if I can find it tomorrow and I can send it on to you, Bello, and you can pass that on.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. There is another question from Ishwar. Can you please explain more about the file watcher stuff that you mentioned? When you make those changes, automatically it reflects.
Oh, .NET Watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just a standard Microsoft tool. So you can read about it on Microsoft.com. So it basically it comes already installed as part of the Getting Started template, and effectively it monitors the files in that particular project, and then it uploads them to the rendering host container. So when I'm making changes in my project, they effectively get updated here. So I could, for example, to show you a real world demo of it, I guess, I could add if I did a H1 up here and literally just save it. Can you still see my screen actually?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, yeah.
There you go. It just immediately happens without me having to build. So certainly for things like view changes, config changes and stuff, I think even for server-side code, it's just running in the background, building and uploading. So it's really nice. You haven't got that kind of the familiar wait time where you have to go make a cup of tea while Sitecore spins up, when that we normally have with Sitecore MVC. So yeah, it's quite refreshing actually to have that. So obviously this is just it's a demo. The Getting Started template is fairly simplistic, but there are more complicated examples, such as the Helix ones and so on, that are more in line with a real world solution. I haven't seen any actual live sites using this yet. It's very new, but Sitecore have got some examples and things that they've demoed of with quite a lot of content and items. So yeah, the understanding is it should be able to deal with quite a lot of load and should perform really well, because obviously it's headless, so everything's kind of scaled independently, and you're using .NET Core, so it should run pretty fast.
Okay.
Yeah, Adam. Just wanted to ask you, is there any the configuration that we need to do on our Docker Compose file? Because I'm just playing around with the Helix MVP site. When I make a change like you did, right? So this is a small change on the wave, and then it should appear the change. But in my case, it was not. So is there something we need to update the config file to point to our projects or something?
Is that on the Helix example for the rendering host SDK, or is that just Helix example for Sitecore in general?
No, it's in Rendering SDK.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure actually. They might have configured .NET Watch differently for that, potentially because there's more files and so on. I haven't played with that one extensively. I know one of the other Sitecore MVPs in the UK, Alex. He's a Katsu Dev on Twitter. He's done quite a lot with the Rendering Host SDK in the Helix example, so he might be able to help you out with that. I can probably pass on his details at some point. If, and you might
Okay, thank you.
Simar is asking if this demo app is available on Git repo.
Yeah, I thought about putting it on GitHub, partly in case my machine blew up and I lost everything, which wouldn't be good. But because I think I'd need to branch from the Rendering Host SDK GitHub repository and then upload it to my GitHub. So yeah, it's something I can take a look at. I kind of thought it'd be nice to do myself. I wrote a blog post about this the other week, and it would have been good to include what I've done in there. So I'll try and do that, and maybe update my blog post and tweet about it to say when that's available.
Okay. I had a personal question around the flow diagram that you showed from Nick.
Oh yeah.
Can you just walk that through once again? It was a little bit fast, like I couldn't follow along.
Yeah, sure.
And I was curious on the inner workings, like how exactly this whole thing works compared to an MVC or a JSS kind of thing. I'm just trying to see both side by side. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, so some of this kind of moves along without me pressing buttons, but so that makes it a little bit hard to kind of follow. So effectively, on the left-hand side, the user's making a HTTP request in their web browser. So that's to effectively they're loading a page, but that will resolve to various controllers and various controller actions. And then the rendering engine middleware, which is part of the rendering host SDK runs on the Sitecore content delivery. So this rendering engine middleware is actually the part of this this project. So this startup class is actually running the rendering engine middleware. So this bit here where it's running the Sitecore rendering engine that I showed you, where we bound the card to the model.
Yep.
That is what's kind of doing this. So this is sort of intercepting the request to the action on the controller, as I understand it. And this runs before any kind of response is returned at all. And then it makes a layout service request based on the controller and the action, effectively. And then the layout service client that's part of the SDK then returns the response back to the middleware. Okay. And then the middleware then basically injects the layout service response into the HTTP context within the rendering host project. So the .NET project that we're looking at, and then so kind of that resolve action step there before even the action's been invoked, all this has happened. So it's done this kind of layout service request, got the response, and then pushed it back into the context before the action's invoked. Then the action gets invoked, and at that point, it's got everything from the layout service. Then when it gets to rendering the view, the model's got all the data because that's all come back. And then the placeholders then are rendered. And then the various, so that's like the page placeholders or,
yeah, that's the regular stuff. Yeah.
Parts of your page, etc. And then the components themselves get rendered. And then it binds the models to the views, and then it uses these tag helpers that we saw before to then render out the HTML response back to the user. So I hope does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, I think it makes much sense now.
Yeah, it is very complicated, especially when you look at it like this and there's so much going on. I think the more you work with it, even the getting started template, which I say is quite simple, it starts to make more sense what's happening. yeah, it's very different to standard MVC development, where you're interacting directly with Sitecore and binding your models and returning it in standard MVC. So yeah, there's quite a lot to get your head around.
Yeah. I believe there is one more question from Rashmi. Does this process log into Sitecore logs, or where can we find them? Anything related to this .NET Core?
Yeah, so well, so the log, there are logs, as I say here in the rendering host. If you do this Docker compose logs rendering, you can see all these logs getting written out. But you do have, obviously, you've got your Docker logs, and then I think yeah, I think because it's running inside a container, you can access your logs from the container, but this is probably the easiest way to actually view all the logs, but they won't be in the standard location in Sitecore that you'd expect. So I guess there won't be much in here under kind of the log viewer, for example. You might get some logs about things like the layout service and so on. But then when it gets to the rendering host SDK side of things, and it's actually running within the context of your app, your .NET Core app, then these are the logs that you need to look at here.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
So what about application logs? So if we need to log out some, there's just so many moving blocks in here. So if we need to just see it step by step, so is this the only place that we need to keep a watch on?
So I guess this is standard .NET Core application, but with a bunch of middleware and configuration and routes configured in this start file. There isn't loads of you could do this yourself basically with a .NET Core app and just add in this kind of code to wire up the various elements. So there's nothing to stop you plugging in app insights in here. It may well already be in here in the config, but you could connect up app insights here, and then you'd be able to just log all the kind of application logging to app insights and view that in there, so then you can monitor it. But yeah, I understand what you mean, because there is a lot going on, a lot of different sort of moving parts. But yeah, I think app insights is probably how you do that.
I think you can also add the containers here in the Visual Studio, so you can explore the logs as well.
Oh yes, yeah, true. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, so there's quite a few different options there. There may be some other monitoring tools you can use as well with Docker to look at logs and so on, as well as using the command line. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot of different options for you.
So Adam, I have one question. So you did image rendering, right, on the one of the view. So since this rendering and the CMCD CDs are decoupled, so how this image source is binded by default using the CM as a source?
Yeah. So do you mean the source it's rendering out here?
Yep. Yeah. So if you are accessing basically on rendering host, but the source of this image is from the CM.
Yeah. So obviously that's returned by the layout service. There is some configuration which is in the platform project, which sets things like image parameters and so on. So I've not looked into this further, but this allows the resizing parameters, for example, to be supported. So I imagine you would add your configuration here for where your images resolve to. You could maybe use a CDN instead and get your images returned from the CDN. So the first time they're requested, they come from Sitecore and then they're pushed into the CDN. But yeah, that's not something I've looked at in great detail. I'd imagine if we look at the layout service response, yeah, so all your images, yeah, they're all coming through from the layout service in the same way. But that's something I'll take a look at actually, because I'm interested in knowing that how you do
Yep,
that.
because if we are relying on the CM, so CM should be always accessible to the public.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose because this is the getting started template's just set up to be kind of a simplistic example. It's not kind of scaled out as you would in a kind of production environment.
Adam, I did see Sitecore media.config. Is there anything related to that in your project? I'm just curious.
Here in the platform configuration.
Yeah, I was just curious if this has anything to do with that, or I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got some of the settings like the shared secret for media request protection and so on. So
Okay.
I mean, these are standard kind of Sitecore config files that get pushed into the content management instance.
And this this platform project is the one gets deployed to your rendering service, or
this gets deployed to the content management instance. So that's this one.
the CM instance? Okay.
Yeah. And then this project, the rendering host, is what is basically your .NET Core project, which is your rendering host effectively. So that's this one.
Okay.
Yeah. So that config that you see there isn't running here. That's only on the content management instance.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for Adam here? Okay. Adam, I would really appreciate staying late. I know it's pretty much like 11 p.m. in UK right now. Thank you very much for taking your time and giving us this wonderful presentation. It just gives a lot of insight on what's new and a lot more possibilities with this.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, I haven't used it in anger, so I've still got a lot to learn. But yeah, it's interesting to see the direction that Sitecore's heading in. And I think it's a good one. I think it's going to bring some challenges working this way, but also quite a lot of positives as well. So I think it's quite kind of exciting times to be a Sitecore developer at the moment.
Believe it will bring a lot of smile on the regular .NET developers. They don't want to learn React or go towards SXA direction or something like that.
Yeah.
Just go with the MVC, like moving away from MVC but into the latest .NET world of things.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you can have like I guess a Sitecore architect in your team, maybe a Sitecore lead or something, and then some of the other developers may not know much about Sitecore, but they can still build Sitecore powered websites. So and as you say, without having to learn JSS or SXA or whatever, or front end frameworks. So yeah, I think it could be a really useful approach.